You know, in line with the idea of that God got there before we did, and that's very, very key, I think, for any of us who follow Jesus and relating to our world. There's a beautiful story that I'd like to tell you, and then it might even bring a scripture to your mind as I tell the story. About 600 years before Christ, there was a major plague in Athens. It would be of the bubonic type or the Black Plague, just thousands and thousands of people dying. The wise people, the elders, got together and they worshipped and sacrificed to every god they had. And of course, as you know, the Greeks had many, many gods. They sacrificed all of them and the plague didn't stop. So at one of the council meetings, somebody mentioned that, you know, there's a very, very wise man on the island of Crete. His name is Epimenides. Let's call for Epimenides and see if he knows what to do. So they brought Epimenides, and he got off the boat, met the elders, and they told him what the problem was, and he said, well, he said, I'll tell you what. He said, why don't you meet me at sunrise and bring bricks or stones and mortar and stonemasons and sheep. I'm going to bed. It was almost that. By the way, this is recorded in Socrates and Diogenes. They both write about this actual event that happened in history, 600 years before Jesus. They protested, but people are dying. Tell us what to do. He said, meet me at sunrise with stonemasons, stones, and sheep. And I'm going to bed. He was tired. So anyway, they got up the next morning. They had gathered these things he needed. And he said to them, he said, I don't have an answer for your problem. In fact, I don't know what to do. But I'm going to make 3 assumptions. I'm going to make an assumption that, number one, that there's a God that you have not worshiped to. They have not sacrificed to yet. There's some God that you don't know about. Number 2, I'm going to make another assumption that that God could do something about this if he wanted to. And the third assumption is, if we tell him how ignorant we are of him and tell him we're sorry we're ignorant of him, but we don't know about him, and beg for his mercy, my assumption is he might help. So now, release the sheep on the hillside, and wherever one lays down, send the stonemasons and put the stones there and build an altar, and we'll sacrifice a sheep on that altar. And they protested again. They said the sheep have been locked up all night. They're hungry. They won't lay down till afternoon. He said, release the sheep on the hillside. So they did that, and within minutes, a sheep would lay down here, one there. The stonemasons went, built these small altars, and they came back to Epimenides and they said, okay, we're ready. The sheep have laid down. We've built the altars. What should we do now? He said, well, we'll sacrifice a sheep on each of those altars that we built. And they said, well, what name should we put on the altars? We always have a name to put on. And he said, well, that would be the height of arrogance. We've assumed we don't know the name of this God. This is to an unknown God. So just put on every one of those altars, agnosto theo, means to the unknown God. For many of you who know the scriptures, you're way ahead of me. 600 years later, Paul approaches Athens, talks to the elders and says, you know, I see you're a very religious people. As a matter of fact, I saw an altar on the way into town that said, to the unknown God. Isn't that wonderful how God prepared those people to hear about Jesus? 600 years before, all these people knew about that. God got there long before Paul did. Of course, he explained Jesus more fully than they had understood. But God was at work, building a foundation so that they would accept the message. That's been my experience with almost every situation that I come into, is I discover that God has really been active in the lives of people. Now, you have to have a little faith to see that, because it's usually not very spiritual looking. It's not very wonderful and gigantic in his work. Maybe small, but you can see it. You can find it. And so my job, typically when I meet with people, is to find out what he's been doing and help that.